The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and by Thursday, Vivienne Ashby had ceased to exist. That was how it felt, at least. The solicitor had come to the house on Greystone Lane with a leather satchel and a careful face, the kind of face men wear when they are about to say something they have rehearsed. He had sat across from her aunt at the mahogany table where Vivienne had eaten breakfast every morning for 19 years, and he had explained, in quiet and precise language, that the terms of her father's will had been contested successfully by her aunt's husband, that the estate of Ashby Park had passed out of her hands, and that she had, as of that morning, no legal claim to anything in the room she was sitting in. Her aunt had not looked at her once during the entire meeting. Vivienne had looked at her aunt constantly. She was trying to understand how a woman could sit so still while a life was being taken apart beside her. She understood later, of course. Her aunt had known. She had known for months. The position at Dunmore Hall had been her aunt's idea, which should have told her everything. Her aunt did not do things out of kindness. She did things out of calculation, and the calculation here was simple. Vivienne had to go somewhere, and she had to go quietly. And a household position 3 counties north was quiet enough that no one who mattered would hear about it. Her aunt had written the letter of introduction herself, describing a capable young woman of modest background seeking a housekeeping role. Not a lady, not the daughter of a baronet, a woman of modest background. Vivienne had read the letter once, then folded it along its creases and placed it in her coat pocket. She had not corrected a single word. The coach to Dunmore took the better part of 2 days. Vivienne sat with her trunk between her feet and the countryside moving past the window and thought about her father. He had been a careful man. He had loved her in the way careful men love their daughters, which is to say steadily and without much demonstration, but she had never doubted it. He had told her once that Ashby Park would always be hers. He had said it the way people say things they believe to be permanent. He had not anticipated his wife's younger sister marrying a man like Hartwell. She arrived at Dunmore Hall on a gray afternoon in October, when the light came sideways through the trees and turned everything the color of old copper. The hall itself was larger than she had expected. It sat at the end of a long gravel drive, built in the old style with high windows and a stone facade that had gone darker with the years. There were no flowers. The gardens were clipped and geometric and gave nothing away. A woman came to meet her at the servants' entrance. She introduced herself as Mrs. Fenwick, the housekeeper, and she looked at Vivienne with the particular attention that experienced housekeepers use to assess a new member of staff. Not unkind, but thorough. "Your letter came last week," Mrs. Fenwick said. "I was not expecting someone quite so young." "I am older than I look," Vivienne said. Mrs. Fenwick considered this. Then she said, "The household runs on a strict schedule. His Grace keeps to himself. You will not be required to interact with him directly, but you will be required to be invisible when he is present. Can you manage that?" Vivienne thought of all the rooms she had moved through in the past 2 months, shrinking herself smaller in each one. "Yes," she said, "I can manage that." She was given a room in the east wing of the servants' quarters, small but clean, with a window that looked out over the kitchen garden. She unpacked her single trunk slowly. She had brought very little. Most of what had been hers was still in the house on Greystone Lane, in rooms that no longer belonged to her. She set her mother's brooch on the windowsill. It was the one thing she had taken before the solicitor's visit. She had known somehow that there would not be a second chance. The Duke of Dunmore was not what she had imagined. She had constructed a picture of him during the coach ride, assembled from the few things she knew. Old family, considerable wealth, a reputation for keeping to himself that had calcified over the years into something the village spoke of with a mixture of respect and unease. She had imagined someone older, someone with the sealed quality of a man who has decided the world has nothing new to offer him. Lord Aubrey Sinclair was 33 years old and moved through his own house like he was solving a problem. She saw him first from the upper landing 3 days after her arrival. She had been carrying linens and had pressed herself back against the wall as Mrs. Fenwick had instructed, and he had walked through the entrance hall below without looking up. He was tall. He walked quickly and with purpose. He paused at the door of the library, checked something in his hand, and went in. The door closed. That was all. But Vivienne stood on the landing for a moment longer than necessary, holding the linens. Because something about the way he had stopped at the library door had caught at her. He had not opened it immediately. He had stood with his hand on the frame for just a second, the way you stand at the edge of something you are not certain you want to enter. She filed it away and went back to work. The work was not difficult, but it was constant. She had not understood before how much labor was required to maintain a house of this size. There were 32 rooms in Dunmore Hall, and she was responsible for the condition of 11 of them. She learned the schedule quickly. She learned which floorboards creaked, and which doors needed to be lifted slightly as they were opened, and which windows let in the draft on the west side of the building. She learned that His Grace took his breakfast at 7 and his dinner at 8, and that he preferred the library in the evenings and the east-facing study in the mornings. She learned that he read constantly. The library at Dunmore was not a decorative library. The books were used. Spines cracked, pages marked, volumes left open on the reading table with their faces down in the way that would have horrified a librarian, but told her something about the man using them. She was not supposed to linger in the library. She was supposed to dust, replace the candles, and leave. She did all of these things. She did not linger. She looked, though. She could not help looking. There was a portrait on the far wall that stopped her the third time she entered the room. It was a woman, painted perhaps 30 years ago, in the style that had been fashionable then. She was not beautiful in the obvious way, but she had the kind of face that stayed with you. A quality of attention in her expression, like she was listening very carefully to something no one else could hear. Vivienne knew that face. She stood in front of the portrait for longer than was wise. She looked at the shape of the nose, the set of the mouth, the way the light fell across the painted collarbone. She knew that face because she had seen it in miniature, in the small oval portrait her mother had kept in her writing desk, the one she had looked at sometimes in the evenings without ever explaining why. The woman in the portrait was her mother's oldest friend. Her mother had spoken of her rarely, and with the particular care people use for things that hurt. She had died young. That was all her mother had ever said. She died young, and I have never stopped being sorry for it. Vivienne stepped back from the portrait. She picked up her cloth and finished dusting the shelves. She left the room, and she did not let her hands shake until she was in the corridor with the door shut behind her. It was Mrs. Fenwick who told her, without meaning to, the piece she was missing. They were in the kitchen on a Wednesday evening after dinner had been cleared, and Mrs. Fenwick was going over the household accounts with the methodical satisfaction of a woman who finds comfort in numbers. Vivienne was mending a curtain that had been torn in the east sitting room. They had settled into a kind of easy silence over the weeks, she and Mrs. Fenwick. The older woman did not ask unnecessary questions. Vivienne respected that. "I've been with this household for 26 years, Mrs. Fenwick said, not looking up from her ledger. "Since before the old Duke died, since His Grace was a boy." Vivienne kept her attention on her mending. "His mother was a remarkable woman," Mrs. Fenwick continued. "People in the village still talk about her. She had a gift for seeing what people needed before they knew themselves." Vivienne said carefully, "She must have died quite young." 19 years ago, Mrs. Fenwick said. "His Grace was 14. It was a difficult winter, 19 years. Vivienne's hand stilled on the curtain. Her father had died 2 years ago. Before that, in the last year of his life, he had grown quieter than usual. And she had once found him at his desk with a letter in his hand, reading it with an expression she had not known how to name. He had folded it quickly when he heard her come in. He had said it was nothing. She thought now that it had not been nothing. She thought about the fact that her mother's oldest friend had been the mistress of Dunmore Hall. She thought about the portrait in the library. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in this kitchen, in this house, in a position she was not supposed to occupy, and she thought about whether any of it was an accident. She didn't know yet, but she was beginning to think it wasn't. His Grace did not speak to her for the first 6 weeks. Then one morning she went to replace the candles in the library at 7:30, which was later than usual because one of the other girls had taken ill and the schedule had shifted, and he was still there. He was standing at the window with a letter in his hand. He turned when she came in. She stopped immediately and began to back out. "It's all right," he said. "You can go ahead." She went ahead. She moved around the perimeter of the room, replacing candles, keeping her eyes on her work. She was aware of him the way you are aware of something that might require your attention. Not afraid, attentive. She had nearly finished when he said, without preamble, "That portrait. Have you looked at it?" She turned. He was still standing at the window, but he was watching her now. His expression was not unkind. It was assessing. "Yes," she said. "Do you know who she is?" Vivienne looked at the portrait. She looked at him. She made a decision. "I believe I might," she said, "though I'm not certain how to explain it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Try." So she told him. Not everything, not then. But she told him that she recognized the woman in the portrait, that she believed the woman had been a close friend of her mother's, that she had not expected to find her here in this house, and that finding her had raised questions she was still trying to answer. He listened without interrupting. That surprised her. Men in his position did not usually listen to housemaids. "What was your mother's name?" he asked when she had finished. "Louisa Ashby," she said, "before she was married." A small thing, quickly controlled, but she saw it. No," he said, very quietly. "I know that name." He found her the next afternoon in the corridor, outside the east sitting room. He was carrying a box, wooden and dusty, the kind of box that has been on a shelf for a long time. He said, "There is something I would like you to look at, if you are willing." They went to the library. He set the box on the reading table and opened it. Inside were letters, bundled with ribbon, that had faded from red to the color of old brick, and beneath the letters, a miniature in an oval frame. Vivienne looked at the miniature. It was her mother, young, perhaps 20, with her hair loose and an expression that Vivienne had never seen in life because by the time she was old enough to remember her mother's face, the lightness had already gone out of it. But she knew it. She would have known it anywhere. She reached out and touched the edge of the frame without picking it up. "These were in the library?" she asked. "In a trunk in the upper room," he said. "My mother's things. I went through them after our conversation yesterday. She had kept them for years, apparently. I didn't know." He sat down in the chair across the reading table. He looked at her the way he had looked at the portrait that morning in the entrance hall, with that quality of trying to solve something. "Your mother and mine were close," he said. "Very close, it seems, from the letters." He paused. "I did not know my mother had a friend like that. She never spoke of it. I think it may have been too painful." Vivienne sat down slowly across from him. She was not thinking, in that moment, about whether she should be sitting in his presence, or whether it was appropriate, or what Mrs. Fenwick would say. She was thinking about her mother, about the evenings at the writing desk, about the small oval portrait and the careful silences. She thought they must have quarreled, Vivienne said, or lost each other some other way. My mother never spoke of her either. But she had her portrait. He looked at the letters. He said, "There are things in here that I don't fully understand yet." References to a situation. Something involving your family. What kind of situation? He chose a letter from the middle of the bundle and unfolded it. He read for a moment, then turned it toward her so she could see a passage near the bottom. She read it. She read it twice. The handwriting was her mother's. She would have known it anywhere. And what it said was that she had tried, and that she was sorry, and that she feared for the future of the estate if things continued as they were. That she had seen what Vivienne's aunt's husband was doing with the accounts, and she did not know how to stop it. That she had thought of writing to the Countess of Dunmore, but did not want to cause trouble. She had not written, and the Countess of Dunmore had died that winter. And nothing had been stopped. Vivienne set the letter down. She was very careful about her breathing. "My father lost the estate," she said, 2 years after my mother died, to her sister's husband. The solicitor said it was legal. He said the will had been contested. He was looking at her with full attention now, not with pity. She was grateful for that. She was very tired of pity. What was the basis of the contest, he asked. She told him. She told him about the signed documents her aunt's husband had produced, documents her father had supposedly signed transferring certain assets prior to his death. She told him she had never believed her father had signed them willingly, that she had no proof, that she had nowhere to bring the question. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. The fire moved in the grate. Outside, somewhere, a door opened and closed. He said, "How long have you known who I was?" "Since the portrait," she said. She met his eyes. She did not look away. "A few weeks." He said, "And you didn't tell me." "I didn't know what I would be asking you for," she said. "It wouldn't have been fair." He looked at her for a moment that stretched longer than was comfortable. Then something in his face settled, not quite a smile, but the movement toward one. He said, "I have a solicitor in Edinburgh who is very good at finding things that have been filed incorrectly." Vivienne said nothing. He said, "Your father wrote to my mother 4 months before she died. There is a letter here." He was concerned about the same documents your aunt's husband later used. He had tried to raise the issue with his own solicitor and had been turned away. He asked my mother if she knew anyone who might help. Vivienne closed her eyes for 1 second. "She died before she could answer him," she said. "Yes," he said, "she did." The fire shifted. A log settled. Vivienne opened her eyes. She said, "My name is not what I gave Mrs. Fenwick. My full name is Vivienne Louisa Ashby. My father was Sir Hugh Ashby of Greystone Lane, Wiltshire. I came here because my aunt arranged the position and I had nowhere else to go. I should have told you before now." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should have, yes." She waited for something else. An expression of displeasure, or a reminder of the circumstances, or the particular coolness that men in his position could produce when they felt they had been managed. Instead he said, simply, "I intend to do something about this." She did not ask him what he meant. She thought she understood. The Edinburgh solicitor arrived 6 weeks later. He was a small, precise man named Halford, who wore the same slightly distant expression that all good legal men wore, the one that meant he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He and his Grace spent 3 days in the library with the door closed. Vivienne learned nothing during those 3 days, except that Mrs. Fenwick had noticed something, because the housekeeper began bringing Vivienne's afternoon tea to the upper sitting room instead of the kitchen, without explanation, and Mrs. Fenwick did not do things without reason. On the 4th day, his Grace came to find her. She was in the kitchen garden, which she had taken to walking in the afternoons when her work was finished. It was December now, and the garden was bare. But she found she liked it anyway. There was something honest about a bare garden. He came around the side of the house and stopped a few feet away, and she turned to look at him with the now familiar feeling of someone standing at the edge of something. He said, "Halford has found what he was looking for." She waited. He said, "The documents your aunt's husband produced were not forgeries, exactly. They were real documents. Your father did sign them. But the signatures were obtained under circumstances that Halford believes he can successfully characterize as coercion. There are witnesses still living, tenants on the estate who were present during certain conversations in the last year of your father's life. They had not been asked before, because no one had thought to ask them." Vivienne felt something shift in her chest, quiet and enormous. She said, "Can it be undone?" "It is not simple," he said, "and it will not be quick. But Halford believes there is a case to be made, and Halford does not say that lightly." He paused. "It will require your involvement. There will be legal proceedings. It may become public." She thought of her aunt's face across the mahogany table, the studied stillness, the practiced absence of expression. "I am not afraid of public," she said. He nodded once. He looked out over the bare garden, and she thought she saw something in him that had been there since the first day on the landing, that quality of standing at the edge of a room, deciding. He said, "You should know that I intend to write to your aunt's husband myself. Before the proceedings begin, I will not tell him what Halford has found, but I will make it clear that the matter is being looked into, and by whom." She looked at him. She said, "That is not nothing." "No," he said, "it is not." The wind moved through the empty garden. Vivienne looked at the turned earth where the kitchen beds would come up in spring. She thought about her mother writing a letter she never sent, about her father writing a letter that came too late, about the ways careful people tried to do the right thing and sometimes missed each other by a season. She thought about the portrait in the library, the woman who had listened so carefully to something no one else could hear. She said, "Your mother would have written back, you know. If she had lived, I believe she would have." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." The word was simple and without ornamentation, and she understood from it that he had thought about this too, in the weeks since the box of letters, in the evenings in the library when she had not been present, that he had sat with the same absence and tried to fill it in. She said, "I am glad the letters are still there," he said. "I am glad you recognized her portrait." They stood in the garden for another minute, neither of them moving. The light was going. In the house, somewhere, a door opened, and the sound of the kitchen came briefly into the cold air, and then the door closed again, and it was quiet. She did not know, yet, what the legal proceedings would find, or how long they would take, or what would be left of Ashby Park when it was over. She did not know what she would call this man once she was no longer employed in his household, or what he would call her. She did not know very much at all about what came next, but she knew the letters were real. She knew her father's name was in them. She knew that His Grace of Dunmore had a solicitor in Edinburgh who was very good at his work, and a quality of attention that made you feel, when he turned it on you, that the thing you had said would not be forgotten. She had learned, in the past months, that she could bear quite a lot if she had to. She was beginning to think, standing in that bare December garden, that she might not have to bear this one alone.